The insistent, vibrating buzz of my phone on the nightstand was the sound that dragged me from a dead sleep. A sound I had come to associate with industrial-scale disaster. It wasn't my morning alarm. It was the emergency line. This was the sound of a turbine failing, a bridge cracking, situations spiraling out of control that required massive machinery and immediate decisive action. I fumbled for the phone, the screen blazing to life with a text message from my foreman, Dave. It was 3:17 a.m. boss, emergency call from the steel mill. Main casting turbine on line 3 has thrown a bearing. They have to shut down the whole plant in an hour if we can't get it moved. They need the heavy crane and the 7-axle lowboy on site by 6 a.m. We need to roll in 30. My heart sank, but the adrenaline was already pumping. This was the kind of call my business was built and a high stakes. Time-sensitive logistical nightmare where every minute of downtime cost our client a fortune. It was the kind of complex, high-pressure puzzle with massive machinery that I loved. But as I threw on my heavy-duty work clothes, a cold, familiar, and deeply infuriating dread washed over me. I walked to my bedroom window, which overlooked the quiet, pristine cul-de-sac, and peered down at my driveway. And there it was, gleaming like a malevolent ghost under the perfectly spaced HOA-approved streetlights of the Cypress Landing community was a pristine, white Range Rover. It was parked squarely, perfectly, and deliberately across the entrance to my private driveway, completely blocking in my F450 heavy-duty work truck, the very vehicle I needed to lead my convoy to the mill.
How?
It was her car. Melinda's car, and its placement was not an accident. It was a declaration of war. My name is Alex Thorne, and I own and operate Thorne Industrial Salvage and Heavy Haul. I'm for all intents and purposes a professional problem solver. If a factory needs a 10-ton piece of machinery moved from a collapsing roof, if a historical society needs a century-old bridge span lifted and transported, or if a train derails in a ravine, I am the man they call. My world is one of massive cranes, powerful flatbeds, and the beautiful, brutal logic of physics and engineering. My home, this quiet, rustic house at the end of this perfect suburban cul-de-sac, was supposed to be my sanctuary from that world. A place of profound peace and quiet. My house was an anomaly, an inheritance from my grandparents. It was an older, 2-acre property that had existed long before the Cypress Landing development was ever conceived. When the developer built the community, they had built it around my land, creating a perfect circle of enormous, identical houses, with my older, more rustic home and its large workshop garage sitting at the very end. A stubborn, unyielding piece of history in a sea of modern conformity. I was legally exempt from their HOA, a fact that Melinda, the HOA president and my next-door neighbor, seemed to consider a personal affront. A flaw in her otherwise perfect matrix of control, her campaign to make my life miserable, to force me to sell the property to the HOA so they could complete their perfect uniform circle, had been a slow, grinding siege. And her weapon of choice, the battering ram she used against the fortress of my patience, was her car. My long private driveway was the only access to my house and my workshop. It's connected to the HOA's cul-de-sac at a narrow point right between my property line and hers. For the last 6 months, she had taken to using the entrance to my driveway as her personal overflow parking spot. At first, it was for a few minutes while she checked her mail, then a few hours when she had guests. Now, she would leave it there overnight, a passive-aggressive act of dominance, a constant, silent message that she could, and would, inconvenience me whenever she pleased. I had tried every reasonable, civilized approach. The first time it happened, I had walked over, knocked on her door, and politely asked her to move. She had smiled a tight, condescending smile that never reached her eyes, and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, Alex. I had my book club over, and there was simply nowhere else for Beverly to park. You understand?" She had moved it an hour later. After her friend had left, the second time, I had left a polite printed note on her windshield. "Melinda, please refrain from blocking my driveway. I often have to leave for work emergencies at all hours. Thank you." The note was crumpled and thrown on my lawn the next day, and the car remained until noon. The third time, after I missed a non-critical but important meeting, I had called the local police. The 2 officers who responded were sympathetic but ultimately useless. The entrance to my drive was a gray area of asphalt, and they were hesitant to tow a vehicle from what they termed a civil dispute without a court order. "We can ticket it, sir," the older officer had told me with a weary sigh. "But that won't get it moved tonight. Honestly, your best bet is to take her to small claims court to get a permanent injunction. It's a neighborhood issue." That was the moment I knew I would have to solve this problem myself. A court battle would take months, thousands of dollars in legal fees, and would only feed Melinda's hunger for conflict. She saw this as a game, a way to exert her power. I needed to end the game, not just win a round, so I began to prepare, using the tools I knew best: documentation and the law. I sent her a formal, legally drafted letter via certified mail, complete with time-stamped photographs of her vehicle blocking my drive, clearly stating the state statutes on private property and trespass. It was predictably ignored. I then had my lawyer draft and deliver a final, legally binding notice of intent to remove abandoned property. It was a formidable document, citing state and county codes with the precision of an engineering schematic. It gave her a final 72-hour grace period to cease and desist her actions. It stated in unambiguous terms that any vehicle left obstructing the entrance to my private driveway for a period exceeding 1 hour would be considered an abandoned nuisance under state law. It would be removed and disposed of at her expense, and a lien would be placed on her property to cover any and all associated costs. She had received the notice yesterday afternoon. The mail carrier had required her signature. I had watched from my window as she read it on her porch, then laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that had carried across the lawns. She had then crumpled it up and tossed it into her recycling bin. It was a clear, final act of defiant contempt. And now, here we were. 3:17 a.m. A multi-million-dollar steel mill was grinding to a halt, waiting for my crew. And my path to work was blocked by a woman who believed that the rules were only for other people. I walked outside into the cool, pre-dawn air. The white Range Rover gleamed, a monument to her arrogance, and knocked on her door, first politely. Then, with increasing, booming force, I laid on the doorbell, its cheerful chimes a stark contrast to my grim purpose. I could see a light on in an upstairs window, but she refused to answer. She was making her point. She was demonstrating her power over me, forcing me to wait on her schedule, assuming I had nowhere to be. But she had misunderstood the game. She thought we were playing checkers, a simple game of blocking and moving. She had no idea I had just switched the board to three-dimensional, industrial-grade chess. I walked back to my house, a cold, hard calm settling over me. The time for requests, for letters, for politeness, for expecting the law to do its job was over. She had ignored the final legal warning. She had, by the definition of the law I had so clearly laid out for her, abandoned her vehicle on my property. She had, with her own stunning arrogance, just given me complete and total legal authority over her $50,000 luxury SUV. I pulled out my phone. I didn't call the police. I didn't call a tow truck. I called my own dispatch. "Yeah. Dave," I said, my voice quiet but firm as I looked at the white Range Rover gleaming in the darkness. "Change of plans. The mill is on hold for a few hours. Tell them we've had a local emergency. I need the big crane, the 202 WAN, the 7-axle lowboy trailer at my place. Sunrise. We've got a salvage job." There was a pause on the other end, the sound of Dave processing the bizarre request. "A salvage job? At your house, boss?" "That's right," I said, a grim satisfaction in my voice. "We're removing an obstruction. Permanently." The arrival of my equipment at Sunrise was a glorious, earth-shaking spectacle of industrial might. A symphony of diesel and steel that rudely shattered the morning tranquility of Cypress Landing. First came the low, guttural roar of the Kenworth semi-truck, its massive engine echoing through the unnaturally quiet, pristine cul-de-sac. It was pulling the 50-foot 7-axle lowboy trailer, a piece of heavy-duty hardware designed to haul battle tanks and massive electrical transformers. Behind it came the crane, a monstrous, bright yellow Liebherr mobile crane. A 200-ton beast that looked like a mechanical dinosaur awakening in the heart of suburbia. Its long neck folded for travel. The neighbors began to appear on their porches. And in their windows, clutching their coffee mugs and silk robes, their faces a mixture of awe and horrified confusion. This was not the kind of activity they were used to in their carefully curated world of silent irrigation systems and polite garden parties. My crew, a team of seasoned, no-nonsense professionals who had seen it all, got to work with a quiet, methodical efficiency. They knew the story. They had all been inconvenienced by Melinda's parking war at one time or another. This wasn't just a job. It was a matter of professional pride and a little bit of well-earned payback. The cranes. Massive outriggers, extended with a solid hydraulic hiss, planting themselves on the asphalt with ground-protecting pads. Dave, my foreman, expertly maneuvered the crane's boom, its heavy hook block dangling over Melinda's gleaming white range. Rover like the fist of an angry god. This was the moment that finally roused the queen from her slumber. Her front door flew open and she stormed out, her face a mask of furious disbelief. The sight of a 10-story crane preparing to pluck her luxury SUV from the ground was clearly not something her HOA bylaws had prepared her for. What is the meaning of this? She shrieked, her voice cracking with a mixture of rage and panic as she stomped across her perfect lawn in her bathrobe. "What are you doing to my car? I'm calling the police. This is Grand Theft Auto." "Go right ahead, Melinda," said calmly. I was standing by the operation, a tablet in my hand, my own higher resolution camera, recording the entire professional and perfectly legal removal. I walked over and handed her a thick waterproof folder. "You'll want to show this to them when they arrive." Inside the folder was a copy of the final notice of intent to remove abandoned property she had received and ignored. I had included a copy of the signed receipt from the certified mail carrier, proving she had accepted the notice. I had also included a printed copy of the state statute on abandoned vehicles on private property. With the relevant sections highlighted in bright yellow, the final page was a detailed, itemized work order for the removal and disposal of one abandoned 2018 Range Rover. Complete with a preliminary bill for the crane service, the heavy haul transport, and the industrial disposal FIA bill. That already exceeded $10,000. She stared at the documents, her face going from red to a pale, chalky white. She had thought her car was a weapon. She was just beginning to realize that in my world, it was just another piece of poorly secured salvage. She did, of course, call the police. The same 2 deputies from my previous call arrived to a scene that no amount of training could have prepared them for. They saw the massive crane, the semi-truck, the luxury SUV now dangling 10 feet in the air from a set of thick, professional, non-damaging straps, and a screaming woman in a bathrobe. I calmly handed the lead deputy a copy of the folder. He read it, his eyebrows climbing higher with every page. He walked over to Melinda. "Ma'am," he said, his voice heavy with a weary resignation that bordered on exasperation. "He sent you a certified, legally binding notice. You ignored it, according to the state law he has provided, in which I can confirm a vehicle left on private property for more than an hour after such a notice can be considered abandoned. This is a civil matter. There is nothing we can do. He is, by the letter of the law, within his rights. You can't just let him steal my car," she cried, her voice now a pathetic, desperate whimper. "He's not stealing it, ma'am," the deputy replied, a slight edge to his voice. "He's removing it, as per the notice you signed for. You are responsible for all associated costs. I'd suggest you take that up with his lawyer." Defeated and utterly humiliated in front of her entire neighborhood, she could only watch. In sputtering, impotent rage, as my crew gently lowered her Range Rover onto the back of the lowboy trailer. They strapped it down with heavy chains and bright yellow safety binders. The process, an expert, gentle, and deliberate spectacle of industrial professionalism. "Where are you taking it?" she demanded, her voice a pathetic whimper. "To the local impound lot." I almost smiled. No, Melinda, I said, shaking my head. A local impound lot isn't equipped to handle this kind of industrial salvage. We have to take it to a specialized facility that can process it properly. The journey to the car's final destination was a quiet, solemn affair. We drove for an hour, past the manicured suburbs, and out into the gritty, industrial heartland of the state. We weren't headed to a tow yard where she could simply pay a fine and retrieve her car. We were headed to a massive, sprawling metal scrapyard and smelting facility, a place I did a great deal of business with. It was a hellscape of fire, smoke, and mountains of twisted, rusting metal. A place where cars and washing machines and old bridges came to die and be reborn. I had the legal right, as the claimant of the abandoned property, to dispose of it as I saw fit, and the most efficient and permanent form of disposal I knew was recycling. I presented the paperwork to the scrapyard manager. The Range Rover was driven onto a massive industrial scale. It was weighed. I was handed a check for its value as scrap metal, a depressingly small sum that I would later credit against the bill I would be sending Melinda. The title was legally transferred from me to the scrapyard under the state's abandoned vehicle statutes. My part in the car's life was over. The yard foreman, a man who had seen it all, gave the Range Rover an appraising look. He grunted, "Nice car." Then he gestured to a man in the cab of a massive clawed machine. "Crush it. We need the space." I stood and watched as the giant hydraulic claw of a vehicle crusher descended, grabbing the Range Rover in its metal talons. There was a moment of silence, and then a deafening symphony of tearing metal, shattering glass, and groaning steel. The symbol of her status, the weapon of her harassment, was compressed with indifferent, overwhelming force into a tight, ugly 4-foot cube of scrap metal. The cube was then picked up by a massive electromagnet and dropped into a roaring, white-hot furnace where it was consumed by a hellish fire and melted down into an anonymous, glowing ingot of recycled steel. It had, for all intents and purposes, vanished from the face of the earth. I returned home to a blissfully clear driveway. A few days later, my lawyer received a hysterical, threatening letter from Melinda's lawyer, promising a multi-million-dollar lawsuit for the theft and malicious destruction of her vehicle. My lawyer calmly emailed back a single, comprehensive package, the high-definition, time-stamped video of the entire professional removal, signed delivery receipt from the scrapyard, the legal bill of sale to the facility, certified mail receipts from the ignored warnings, and my own formidable, and now legally enforceable, bill for the removal service, for which there was now a lien against her property. The lawsuit never materialized. Melinda was not only humiliated, but she was also facing a massive bill and a potential countersuit from me for months of harassment. She was ousted as HOA president in a furious emergency meeting of her neighbors, many of whom had been late for work that fateful morning. I sat on my porch that evening, the cul-de-sac, blissfully quiet. The spot where she used to park, the patch of asphalt that had been the source of so much conflict, was blessedly, beautifully empty. I had achieved peace, not through anger or argument, but through overwhelming industrial and legal logistics. I hadn't just gotten her to move her car. I had made the problem disappear forever.